So Magnus chooses to go off theory. He plays 1 b3. You can see there's a naughty little look on Magnus's face that I am going to enjoy this game. c5 played, puts his bishop on b2. Knight comes out on c6. Logical play by black, playing in the center. Magnus now plays e4, and suddenly the game is kind of transposed into some weird Sicilian. d6. And now, what is Magnus going to do? Will he play knight to f3 and d4? Actually, he goes for bishop b5, some kind of Rosolimo. Knight to c3. And all that Magnus wants, I believe, is a fresh position. Now, e5 is a very committal move, because with that move, what black has done is that he has weakened the d5 square. But it's a very common structure. It's called the Botwinnik's triangle. What you do is that you put your bishop on g7, knight on e7, control d5, and you have a very free-flowing development. There you go, bishop g7 played. Now what does Magnus do here? Does he continue with d3? Does he put his knight on d5? Black has chosen a very solid setup against the world champion. Also has 20 seconds extra on the clock, so that's a small bonus there. And Magnus taking his time to figure out how to continue. He plays his pawn up to f4. He's ready to break open the diagonal here, but it also opens up the bishop's diagonal. Well, you may want to go knight g7, but then f5 could be a pawn sacrifice that is lurking around. A safe move could be just to take on f4. You know, just take it, develop your knight on e7 and short castle. That should be fine for black. Zhamsaran now taking his time. He wants to be accurate. What does he do? Well, he was about to make his move, but he goes back and he takes now. That's a good move. He takes f4. And Magnus has a choice between taking with the knight or the rook. He takes with the knight, and the knight jumps to e7. Now, d5, both knights are looking at the d5 square, but the knight on c3 cannot move because the bishop on b2 is hanging. Also making moves like rook b1 and all look pretty slow for the time being, and it's not like the d5 square is the ultimate outpost. So let's say rook b1, I castle, you go knight d5, I can take here on b2 and then also take here, and it's possible to break with f5 or play bishop e6. So these are the possibilities that can happen. So Magnus decides to first just solidify his center with making the move d3. Tsydypov castles, queen to d2, connecting the rooks. Now black would be looking for the d5 break, but for now it's not so easy to engineer it. Meanwhile, this bishop can be won. You can play a6. It can't go back to c4 because b5 would trap it. Bishop takes, and now an important move is to take it with the knight. Because once you take it with the knight, then your knight can settle down on d4. But instead he takes it with the bishop. Not the best move. Rook a e1, queen a5. Important move, so that the knight cannot move. Your queen would hang. And if your knight cannot move, your queen also cannot move, because then the knight would hang. So queen a5 needs to be found here, and in fact black would be doing very well. Something like queen a5, a4, rook e8, but he goes queen d7. Now this is a passive move, and Magnus does the right thing. He goes knight d1 and now exchanges off this very strong bishop on g7. Not only do you exchange that bishop, once it's gone, the dark squares around the black king start to become weak. So bishop takes b2, knight takes b2 happens. And now suddenly white's position does look very, very nice. But black's very natural move is what Tsydypov does. He breaks in the center, and I believe this moment is just the most amazing moment of this game. Because notice he wants to take here. Very natural move for anyone is to push e5. And you can see Magnus taking his time. He's got his pieces in his hand. He knows that this is somewhere he needs to think. I would have played e5, but then after something like knight f5 or f6, black is still okay. What Magnus basically understands here is that his knight needs the c4 or d3 square, and he's okay with takes if his queen is not on d2. And with all of this understanding, and also understanding that the c5 pawn is slightly weakened, which is so difficult to see, he makes this move queen f2. I love it. I simply love it. You know, if you play a move like d4, then the knight simply jumps to c4, attacking these squares. So you don't want to play that. You really want to take here. Once you take, just look at this. Take, take. The e4 pawn is isolated, but it doesn't matter, because now your knight can jump to d3, attack here on c5. If you play b6, my knight can jump to c4, attack b6, and it's just such a concrete move. So Tsydypov does take on e4, which is the correct idea, and Magnus takes back. And now, well, if you play b6, there is knight c4, so you might want to trade queens with queen d4, and that is exactly what he does. He plays queen d3, and a good move is now knight b d3, attacking here, but Magnus actually brings his other knight back. This allows actually rook a d8, because now you can't take on c5, your b2 knight is hanging. This wouldn't have been the case if he had played the other rook, other knight, but he takes on f2. This is not a good move. Rook f2, and already white is better. Now just notice how Tsydypov thinks that c5 is defended, but Magnus jumps in and attacks this. Now he defends that, and Magnus jumps in and attacks here, but the bishop is defended, right? King g7. Well, Magnus says that now my rook is attacked, so I'm going to defend it with e5, and now black can't move. Bishop can't move because b6 hangs, knight can't move because bishop hangs, rook can't move because f7 is weak, this rook cannot move because b6 is weak. He's just simply tied up his opponent completely. b5 is some kind of desperation. Knight d6 is a good move, but he goes knight a5, which is also okay. Here, already now a6 pawn is weak, and he goes c4, very aggressive. A simple line is to take, cd, cd, and white is a pawn up with total domination there. But Magnus is taking his time. He has 30 seconds. Zhamsaran is down to 10 seconds. He needs to move his knight here, or he needs to take on c6. What is Magnus going to do? It seems like Magnus wants to be sure about his decision. Down to 17 seconds, and he plays knight to b4. Bishop a8. Some hope for black. Knight a6. He plays his rook to d8, and now knight c7. An important move here is knight to d5, but he makes a mistake with rook d2. Magnus instantly responds back, and now everything is under control, and black is a pawn down. So that is no compensation. He loses his second pawn, and this is game over, because take, and Magnus now converts this quite easily. Knight c4 stops the rook from coming to d2. With just 14 seconds left, you can see Magnus's complete grip over the game of chess here. He understands it so well. c2 is hanging, but he finds rook d1. If you take on c2, knight f5 check exists, so knight e6. He now starts pushing his pawns. b5, you can't take the pawn because of rook b1 pinning here, so you need to move the bishop. He moves it back to a8, and now after rook a1, the pawns are just moving forward. Knight to e3, the c pawn is coming up, rook is entering the position. This is over. c4 comes in, and Tsydypov resigns.